Welcome to the Growth Boss podcast, where we seek out the secrets to high-performing campaigns from some of the smartest marketers in the world. I'm your host, Jared Smith. Today, I have Kerry Barrett with me, and she's going to teach us how to land your first media feature without a PR team. Kerry, thanks so much for being here today.
I am happy to be here, and I'm glad to be in the bucket of the smartest marketing people in the world.
Absolutely. And our first kind of PR expert. So this is super exciting for me too.
Excellent. I'm glad to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. So for people who aren't familiar with you, can you give maybe a little bit of background on your story?
Absolutely. My pleasure. So I have a deep background in news media. I worked as an anchor, a news anchor, TV news anchor, reporter, and producer for 20 years. I overcame a debilitating fear of speaking in order to get there. So I started my career in Wichita Falls, Texas, back in, 2001. And I wrapped up my career at WNBC in New York City with a couple of Emmy Awards and some other awards under my belt. And then I launched my own business in 2019. Slept since then. I have to think about what year it was. 2019, helping executives learn how to speak effectively on camera and business owners. One of the newer things that I'm doing is leveraging my experience in the media to help small business owners get press coverage and publicity for themselves and their businesses without hiring a PR agency, which can run, upwards of $3,500 to $10,000 a month. But you don't need all of that in order to get started. And so I walk business owners through the process of pitching, research, understanding, creating relationships, and then leveraging that media exposure for the next opportunity as well.
Okay, awesome. And for business owners who aren't super familiar with, connecting with the media, what are some things that they need to do before they actually begin that process, before they send out the first email or make a phone call, whatever that process is going to look like? What should they do to kind of prepare themselves in maybe their business?
Yeah, do a little bit of media training,
okay.
Which is one of the things I offer as well. I always say everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And sometimes that punch in the face comes when you walk into a news studio and you realize you have absolutely no idea what's going on and who the people are and where you need to look and what you need to say. So that is one of the core sort of principles of the way that I work with people. But beyond that, let's get down to the foundation, which is a lot of people have this sort of misunderstanding of who they need to be and what their business needs to be before they think about press. They think they need to be a household name. And I always say, absolutely not. The way the household names got to be household names is through their press. Sarah Blakely wasn't a household name. She's the creator of Spanx, if you're not familiar. If you're a woman, you probably are. And she didn't become a household name until she was on Oprah. And Oprah catapulted her business overnight into an international multi-billion-dollar success. So that's the biggest, I think, misunderstanding and reframe that needs to happen. You use the press to get you where you want to go rather than using where you are in order to get press. Really, the first thing, the very first step, and there is a process to go through this, but the very first step is understanding where your audience is. So are they listening to Oprah's new podcast? Are they watching the Drew Barrymore show? Are they watching your hyperlocal news station? Are they listening to particular podcasts? And so there's really two buckets of PR. One is all about credibility and one is all about visibility. Now, for example, my clients are generally not watching NBC News in the middle of the day because they're business owners, they're coaches, they're consultants, they're busy with work. However, it's great for me to say as a credibility booster, I was featured on NBC News, which I was. That didn't do a lot in order to actually boost visibility, but it boosted my credibility. Visibility comes from showing up in the platforms and in outlets in which your audience is engaging. And so the very first step is to do some research and figure out where the people in your space, your competitors, where are they showing up? Google their name. Google media outlets. Google, oftentimes when you Google their name, their media appearances will be one of the very first things that shows up. And then create a list, I would say, of no more certainly than 15 media outlets. Otherwise, you're going to spiral out of control, and begin to figure out who are the editors, who are the journalists, who are the producers, who are taking pitches and producing these segments. And then that's who you begin to reach out to.
Okay. So before I begin that outreach process, though, I was one of those guys that walked into the media room for the first time and was like, oh my gosh, I totally wasn't prepared for this. What are some tips and advice that you give business owners to help them get a little bit more prepared?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I always like to say, and it's where pitches fall flat, is that people deliver their information as if it were marketing. And you're not, in this case, a marketer, you're a business owner, and your primary goal is to educate their audience. You are making the journalist's job easier, and you're not making it easier if you're pitching marketing. Your book probably is not newsworthy, but some nuggets in the book about how to improve your relationship or how to improve your health or whatever, those things are newsworthy. So understand exactly how you are pitching. One of the other things that I think people get a little bit tied up in is understanding their messaging. One of the things that I do with clients is I bring them through this process is we create sort of a grid that they are able to build their messages around, and then they're able to build their sound bites around. A sound bite is that element that is pulled out of your news segment. If you are doing a print interview, it's the piece that's in bold in the middle of the rest of the interview. That's the sound bite or the quote. And so understanding what those sound bites are in order to make your interview really pop and really sizzle is key. It's not a matter of just going in and answering questions. You're there to energetically support the host and support the show as well. And that is lost on a lot of people who have, which is understandable. They haven't been in that environment before. If you make the host or journalist's job difficult, there is a real good chance they're not going to invite you back.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. I love that you said energetically support the host. So, you may have heard, Beyonce talk about her alter ego. When she goes on stage, she kind of has, and I've thought about that as well. I'm like, I kind of do that as well. I call it my inner Ryan Seacrest. I'm like, all right, I'm going to put my Ryan Seacrest hat on. He's just always happy. He's energetic. I'm like, that's what I want to be. That's like the best version of myself. Do you have kind of an alter ego? Is that something that or are you just kind of naturally like always ready to go, energetic and, ready to talk to that?
Such an interesting question. So I have to backtrack a little bit to answer that question for you. I mentioned when we first started talking that I overcame this crushing fear of not just speaking on camera or speaking in front of an audience, just really even being seen. And so when I first started in the news industry, and I know those two things seem like they are polar opposites, and they are, but I love storytelling. I had to figure out how I was going to overcome that. I didn't know anything really about the news world other than what I had seen in an interview. So I didn't understand the concept of creating an alter ego at that point, but I did create almost a character for myself in order to be able to get up on the news desk and deliver stories and deliver breaking news. As I built my skill in being able to effectively communicate, and as I began to understand the audience, and as I began to be able to put the audience first, that element of energetically supporting the show, I was the host, so I wasn't necessarily supporting the host, but I was supporting the show and supporting the viewers, became much more natural. For most of us, it's not something that we're born into. We have to cultivate it and we have to develop it. So to answer your question in a very long-winded way, I did have an alter ego. I never gave her a name, but it was just sort of this character that I put on. And now I understand so innately what's needed that it just turns on automatically.
I love that. I love that. And I love that you mentioned that most people aren't born with it. I think that is kind of something that, in the back of our minds, we're looking at a Ryan Seacrest or an Oprah and we're like, they probably were always this way. And that probably isn't the case. That's something that's been developed over time, and anybody can do that kind of with the right mindset. Wouldn't you agree?
100%. And the good news is, and I always say this to people who are like, well, I'm not a natural performer. And I'm like, you don't need to be Meryl Streep or Daniel Day-Lewis. You don't need to be Oprah. You don't even need to be Ryan Seacrest, which by the way, I also love. You just need to be you, but an elevated version of
yes.
you. And we can all do that. And really that elevated version, and this applies whether you're doing an interview for a magazine or whether you're doing an interview for radio or for TV, doesn't apply as much if you're doing an email interview, meaning if you're just typing answers for, an article. But you have to understand that you don't have to be a natural performer, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yes.
We're all ourselves.
Yep.
And that's a key component to speaking effectively, is having that authentic self.
Yes.
But just with a little bit of a greater understanding that when you're on camera or when you're on radio for that matter, our field of vision is so hyper focused and there's so many different elements that come into play when you are speaking on camera. It's energetically flattening just through the software and the hardware and the fact that, a 3D person is now in a 2D space, understanding how to mitigate that. That's really all it takes.
Yes.
And that means your energy is a little bit more amplified, or maybe you use your hands a little bit more than you normally would, or you lean in when something's particularly exciting or interesting. It's just understanding how the camera affects the dynamics of our delivery.
Yeah. And by me saying I kind of channel my inner Ryan Seacrest, in no way does it feel inauthentic, right?
Yeah.
It just feels like this is the most outgoing version of myself. I am an extreme introvert, but I also recognize, kind of like you said, like if I'm going to jump on camera, I want to be the best version of myself. And so that's where I have to be like, okay, I need a little more energy, a little more excitement. I'm not inauthentic to who I am, but at the 100%. Same time, I do recognize that if I step it up a notch or two, when people are watching it on the other end, it's going to feel a notch or two down from where I feel like I'm delivering it.
Oh, 100%. It's so interesting that you say that. I remember learning that lesson in a sort of a painful way when I was a newbie in the news world. And I was reading a story. It was a story, unfortunately, about a missing mom and her 9-year-old son. And I remember reading it. I felt connected to it. I had a child at that point. Like I could understand empathetically where the story was going and what it felt like. And I got an email from a viewer who asked me how I could read that story or tell that story in such a, maybe the word that they used was blasé way. And I didn't feel at all that I was doing that. I felt very connected to it, but I went back and I watched and I realized where they were coming from, because at that point I hadn't yet learned how to mitigate all of the challenges, that all of the obstacles that speaking on camera puts in front of you without even realizing it. And so that's when I learned that I needed to overcome those obstacles that the camera puts in front of you. And you make a very good point. It's not about being inauthentic. It's about bringing yourself, but bringing a slightly elevated version of yourself so that you're showing up in the best way. And I'm with you. I'm an introvert. I'm incredibly shy. Put me in a room with people I don't know, and I'm going to be the one that ends up in the corner.
Yes.
So if I can do it, I promise anybody can.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. So once we kind of get mentally prepared, we're going in, we know there's going to be bright lights. We kind of have an understanding of what we want to share. What is the next step? How do we begin that outreach process? You mentioned kind of 10 to 15 different either outlets. And I love that you mentioned podcasts too, because like you said, maybe the local news station is not where your audience is. Maybe it is a podcast, but what's the best way to identify that list and then begin the outreach process in a way that, is able to get their attention?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've identified the outlets, and let's say there are 15. Then you want to go to those outlets' websites. And in fact, if it's a magazine, you can Google magazine and media kit. So let's say you're looking to reach out to Elle, right? It's a women's magazine. Elle and Media Kit. And you can go through and you'll see everything about their demographic. You'll see who reads them, what they do. Sometimes they'll even give you like an average name, what their salary is, where they live. Do they have kids? What cars do they drive? Like you can get a full demographic. So you can really find out, is this where I want to be pitching? And then usually for a magazine, there's a couple of different types of people you can pitch. There's an editor, there is a writer, there may be a contributor, or a freelancer, which means they're not staff writers, but they'll pitch the magazine articles or story ideas, and then they'll bring in experts in order to create the story around. So figuring out who exactly, when you're doing your research, look at who is actually writing the articles, or who is the reporter that's interviewing your competitor, and then reach out to that reporter. Now, there's a couple of ways. Sometimes they're very upfront. Like if you go to a TV news station website, a lot of the reporters in their bios will have their emails or have their, I don't know what we're calling it now, whether it's X or Twitter or whatever it is, right? They'll have their accounts there and you can find their contact information. It's a little bit harder on the magazine side, especially if you're pitching a contributor who's not a regular, everyday writer as part of the magazine staff.
Yes.
You can often find their email format. So if you are looking for contact information, you can see in some cases it's, first letter of their first name, last name at, news12.com. And then you know how you can reach out. The other thing to do is try and find a common bond. So for example, if you really have let's say you're a nonprofit and you can't find anybody immediately in your space who's been interviewed, go through, let's say your local news station, and see if there are any reporters there who in their bio talk about sitting on the board of a nonprofit or mention an interest in rehabilitation or rescue animals, or mention an interest in children's charities, or heck, mention that they have kids. Yeah. Find some sort of commonality if you can. And this may be the only thread that you have if you can't find anything else, and use that as a way to create a connection with them. I was reading your bio. I saw that you sit on this board of this particular charity. I have a story that I think might really resonate with you and bring some value to your viewers, and blah, 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 blah.
I love that. And I love how you mentioned, you're looking to bring value to their readers. That's kind of the goal, isn't it? It's like, listen, This isn't about me sharing my story. It's about me helping your readers with something that, you feel could be of value.
100%. And that's why I said not too long ago that where a lot of pitches fall flat is that they focus on marketing, which is very much self-focused as the business owner. And so you can't be focused on that. You have to be focused on what is newsworthy, what is going to bring value. This is not a time for pitching. You can pitch subtly, right? You may have some sort of free resource that they will put in your byline if you're writing an article or you're being featured in an article on a magazine, or they may have a way for you to pitch that in the digital version of the TV news story that's going online. But at the end of the day, your goal is to serve that producer. That producer is not the end user. The end user is the audience. That producer's goal is to serve the audience. So your immediate job is to make that producer or that editor or that reporter's job easier. Remember, they're just humans. They're trying to get their job done with as least, friction as possible. And so serve them. And by that, you serve the audience.
Love it. And assuming they're busy like everybody else in the world, it may require, I would imagine, a follow-up or two. What would be appropriate?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that. So one of the ways that I like to introduce a client into the media world is start with connecting with producers and reporters and whatever on social media. Like their stuff, comment on their stuff, begin to make your face and name somewhat familiar to them. Then I like to start out with an intro pitch. Hey, so-and-so, I'm, Kerry, here's my bio. I'm an expert on these 4 subjects. Don't pick more than 4. Otherwise they'll get confused. You can go up to 6, but there's really 1 or 2 primary things you want to be known as an expert in. And so here's what I can talk about. Here's some story ideas. And then you want to send that sort of intro pitch, I would say quarterly is where you want to be, so that you're just sort of consistently dipping yourself into their ecosystem. In terms of your regular pitches, you want to be sending those out, I would say at a minimum once a month, ideally every 2 weeks. But to answer your question about follow-up, it depends a little bit on who you're pitching. So magazines lead times, if they're a monthly publication, often have a lead time. And the lead time is how long it takes them to get from ideation to actual publish time. And generally that's at least 6 months. It's not quite as long if it's a weekly or a daily, then it might be a month or two, and the digital versions, they're updating constantly. So my point with all of this is it's not a one size fits all. You have to understand what the lead time is. If you are pitching a story that is a Christmas story and you're pitching it in July and you haven't heard anything back in a couple of days, pitch again. If you have a little more leeway, you can wait a week.
Yeah.
I wouldn't follow up any more than 3 times. The last time I follow up, I would say, hey, here I am. I'm back in your inbox again. If it's not the right time or this isn't the right story, I totally understand. I'm going to assume it's a no for now. And I'm going to start pitching other people. That way they know that this story is no longer on the table and you're going to start bringing it to others. But generally speaking, it's 3 follow-ups. Depends a little bit on the urgency of the story and how long the lead time is. If you are pitching something, for example, that is about, when I was on NBC, the story was a National Entrepreneurship Month, and it was the entire month of May. And so I had a little bit of time to do a couple of follow-ups, and I ended up being on at the end of May. If you're doing something that is specifically on National Entrepreneurship Day, and you're pitching it in the beginning of May, your follow-ups are going to be a little more urgent because you're going to miss that deadline if they don't get you.
I love it. And, I think it's just really important. I think so many business owners live in the day-to-day. It's hard to think about this stuff as like, hey, yeah, maybe in 6, 9, 12 months, I'm going to want this. But that's really what it takes to be successful. Because let's take the Christmas example. If you're going to reach out in July, probably good to actually get that process started in March, where you are liking their stuff on LinkedIn and X, and you're kind of getting on their radar so that when you reach out in July, it's not like, oh, who's this? But like, oh, this is actually one of my fans that's kind of been commenting on my stuff for the last couple months. Yeah, I'm going to take 30 seconds and at least read it versus just hit and delete. So I think the more that a business owner can kind of plan this out in advance and think about this and be like, yeah, Christmas is my big time of year. Okay, we'll start planning that at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. And I would say sometimes, because you're absolutely right, it's hard to think 6 to 9 months in advance. I have some business owners who send their assistants or their virtual assistants to my program because they're the ones who are actually doing the reach out and the pitch. Because for the business owner, they're in the middle of the fire. They don't have time to think about what things look like 6 to 9 months from now. And so their assistants generally have a fairly good idea of calendar. And so we walk their assistants through the very same process that we would put the business owner in. You don't have to hire an agency, I would say. In fact, I know you don't have to hire an agency, but sometimes it does help to outsource some of the to-do lists, the task items. And so often, like I said, we work with assistants in order to help make the business owner's life a little bit easier and less chaotic when it comes to planning this and pitching and getting the articles out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kerry, what do you feel like kind of the top 1% of your clients, the ones that do the best with PR, what do you feel like they have in common?
2 things. Number 1, they are little energizer bunnies. They do not give up. And listen, I have a lot of people ask me when we first start talking, can you guarantee PR? Guaranteeing PR it's actually called advertising. It's where you pay. And I don't teach people pay to play. That's not my jam. I want you to get earned media, which is media that you earn for free based on your expertise. So you cannot guarantee PR. And like, for example, I have a client who we are pitching right now, a story about how to not be the boss nobody wants to talk to at your holiday Christmas parties. Right?
Love it.
And she wanted to send it out prior to the election. And I'm like, listen, not right now. It's not the right time. Don't send it out right now. That's sort of what PR is. It's the right story at the right time, hitting the right person. There's a lot of variables. You can mitigate and negate a lot of them by doing the right research. But at the end of the day, it is work, and you have to be okay with facing rejection. I know this. I got hundreds of pitches daily in my inbox when I was a journalist, and the ones that were spray and pray, meaning it was just mass PR pitches or press releases sent out to everybody. I didn't even open them. Delete, 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 delete. So if you can take the time to make your pitch personalized, you can take the time to make your pitch important, and you send them out individually, that is part of that sort of energy that goes along with doing the work. So you have to be resilient and okay with taking rejection. And you got to recognize that the work, at least in the beginning, till you have the connections, is not for the faint of heart. It's going to take.
Absolutely. And just out of curiosity, what was the subject line for that business owner that, is talking about, how not to be that weird boss at the Christmas party or whatever the exact headline was? What was the subject line for something like that?
Oh, now you're going to put me on the spot. I forget exactly what the headline was off the top of my head, but it was something along the lines of, oh my gosh, I'm trying to think. Don't be the boss nobody wants to talk to. A holiday Christmas party etiquette for leaders, or something along those lines. And we also put local expert, because she's pitching this particular story, her local magazine. So local expert, I think it was : don't be the boss nobody wants to talk to. Holiday etiquette for leaders.
Love it. Okay, awesome. Is there anything else? I feel like we've covered, pretty much everything. Is there anything else that you feel like most business owners need to understand before they begin this process?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to underscore what I said at the beginning, which is, I hear this from people all the time. I'm not a household name. I don't have an interesting story. By the way, that line is highly triggering for me. Everybody has an interesting story, or I haven't hit 7 figures, or whatever these sort of arbitrary prerequisites that people put up, which are really just protections for perceived failures, or what they imagine this process might be like. Well, I can't do it yet because this, because this, because this. And I know, because I do the same thing to myself.
Yes.
But recognize that the way people become household names, unless it's lightning in a bottle, they use the visibility and the credibility that comes from that press coverage to become the household name.
Absolutely.
You have a story. I promise. I've been doing this for 25 years. I've never come across a person who doesn't have a story to share, ever. And you don't need to have 7-figure income. I'm not a 7-figure business owner yet. Mm-hmm. And you don't need to be a household name, which I've said now a million times, but it's worthy of repeating.
It is. And, it goes back to the Sarah Blakely story, which I didn't know that was kind of her pivotal moment. And I just wonder how many people that are listening right now, their pivotal moment is on the other end of being uncomfortable, doing the outreach, and then, kind of seeing where that goes. The other story that comes to my mind is Timothy Ferriss, who, same sort of thing. A lot of people know about him now. But the thing that got him off the ground was when he wrote that book. I mean, he reached out to, I want to say, thousands of different people, and was just relentless in pushing his story out there into the world. So, Kerry, thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.